So yeah, starting with Grace.
Kia ora tātou, ko Arohanui Grace, tōku ingoa. My name's Arohanui Grace. I'm the governance manager here at Spreydon-Cashmere-Heathcote.
Kia ora koutou, I'm Lee Sampson. I'm a community board member based in Cashmere.
Hello, I'm Tim Scandard. I'm the councillor for Cashmere and a member of the board.
Good afternoon. My name is Waihoro, community board member for Heathcote.
Yep, David, and then we at the back there. Yep.
Tēnā koutou, ko David Hawke aho. I'm here today as on behalf of our daughter, but some of you will know me as Secretary of Horsell Residents Association.
Thanks, David.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
I am a principal advisor in the superintendent team here at Casper.
Good afternoon, Keir Leslie, a community board member for Cashmere.
Kia ora, Tim Lindley, community board member for Heathcote.
Kia ora, Melanie Coker, the councillor for Spreydon.
Kia ora, Jane Walters, community board advisor.
Thanks, Jane. And I think Sarah doesn't have a voice, so we've also got Sarah Templeton on, councillor for Heathcote. So apologies, just got apologies from Roy for illness and Lee for early departure. Yep. Yes. Cool. And Kia, was it early departure as well, or late arrival? Oh yeah. No, sweet. That was it. Anyway, we'll forget that one. Tim?
I just told Callum before that if anyone's planning to go to the Opawaho River Network meeting with regards to sediment at Heathcote, the Horsell Library, I've let them know that we've got this workshop and some of us may be late. Just...
Cool, thanks. I don't need moving and seconding for this if it's not a meeting. Oh, no, cool. All right, so first up, we've got Community Open Forum. So David Hawke's come along to chat to us about the council's community engagement process, and was that in particular with respect to the roundabout issue?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
That was the thing that prompted it, but I guess there's other things that will slide into that as well. Yep.
Cool, so you've got 5 minutes and we'll
right, see how we go.
Yeah, so time for questions.
Okay,
Cool.
Yep. So kia ora, thanks for making the time available for me to talk to you today. The person who would be here is our daughter, Jenny Hawke. So I'm on behalf of her with a few other comments to toss in as well. So I want to talk to you particularly about council engagement processes and getting a wider demographic on board. So as Callum just said, the issue that prompted us was the proposed intersection changes at that end of Colombo Street. So anyway, Jenny and her partner own a home as of 12 months ago, close to that intersection, and they walk, bike and drive through it, and they find it challenging. So when the proposal that you discussed a fortnight ago came along, she said, why not? It's an opportunity to be involved and hopefully to make a difference. So she's heard me talk at home lots of times, and actually sometimes with this board as it happens. So anyway, she wrote a submission based on her and her partner's experience. She wasn't happy with the proposal. She got an email saying the proposal was going ahead anyway, inviting her to a community board meeting at 4 o'clock, which is actually the same time as today's meeting. And she thought, you know, like, what's all this for? How can I get to a meeting? Regular people have jobs, you know. And at this stage, I was really getting an earful. You know, why are we bothering with all this? It's just a box ticking exercise. And the sort of final twist of the knife, a way of disregarding me and my generation. So one of her key contentions was preference for traffic signals, and she thought that that was noted but not really explored. So I think as board members, if you go into the supporting material that came with your agenda, there is the traffic signal question had actually been explored by staff in some detail, but as a person coming from outside, she wouldn't know to go where to go looking for that. So the question that I guess I have for you is this, you know, like, what should Jenny do next time? She actually is pretty, like I know we're online, so we've got to watch the language and so on, but she's pretty annoyed.
Hmm.
And if we sort of just go through some of the things that, from my perspective, that worked. So letterbox drop, fantastic. Otherwise, she would never have heard about it. But I think one of the things that wasn't really clear in the way that consultation and a lot of other consultations go ahead is actually what is being sought in a particular consultation. What is the council wanting to, what are they wanting to know? And arguably, in this case, the project's already been decided and inputs are only about the detail. I don't know. So I guess if you take the more sort of global view, which is where my interest comes in a bit, is, you know, is this the best way to engage with your community? People want to feel that their view has been heard, outcomes are not predetermined, and also the particular demographics are not shut out of the process. In that regard, I've just come from the ECAN draft annual plan presentation, and everyone looked just like me. So my age group. I don't know whether that was the case in today's new city council draft annual plan, whether the demographic went that way or not, I don't know. But, you know, there is this issue of Jenny's age group of even if they want to, how do they actually get involved? And as it happens, I was talking yesterday with Jo Robertson from the Addington community, who I think many of you will know. And she had in mind the process that Waka Kotahi is going through with the Bryme Street crossing at Collins Street. And the thing that we were talking about is, you know, like, why isn't Waka Kotahi, in this case, building relationships with local communities? So it's more a relationship sort of thing. And it brought to mind a conversation that we had at Residents Association a couple of years ago. We had the engagement manager from City Council and we asked her, why not have your staff hang out, say, at local schools and actually get to know people? And she looked a bit like possum stuck in headlights and said, actually, I can't afford to do that. And in the present system, I think, you know, like you think of, if we sort of try and tie it all back together, is for maybe elected members, because they're the ones with all the time. I'm smiling. Go see those people who have submitted with a view to helping them understand the process. And with some encouragement, people like Jenny will continue engaging. And maybe, you know, like if we look at local government review, is actually getting her and other people like her who are interested actually involved more and more in the process. Kia ora. Thank you very much.
Kia ora. Thanks so much, David. And we'll have time for questions. I just had a couple of thoughts. I mean, I think that from our board's point of view, we're aware that council, you know, City Council, just like ECAN, has challenges reaching certain groups of people, or rather they might have challenges reaching us. And we do tend to see demographic bias in terms of who submits to things that we put out for consultation. We're trying to think about as a board how we can better engage with communities that we might not have come in contact to in the past, but it is a challenge, and I appreciate your thoughts on that. I did have a question around when you said that she was told that the proposal was going ahead in it anyway, do you know, was that specifically what she was told? Because that was something that was yet to come to a board meeting.
No, that's her looking back.
Right.
It was going ahead anyway, and that this was all just a process to well, she didn't think of it in this term, but to fulfill the requirements of the Local Government Act, rather than a process of actually seeking to find out the inputs and experiences of people who use that intersection on an everyday basis for, in her case, walking, biking and driving.
Gotcha. Okay. Tim, you had a question?
You mentioned that 4 o'clock wasn't, you know, like obviously she's working, they are working. So if it had been shifted back an hour, would that have helped?
Timing is really tricky.
Yeah.
So if you think of it in her case, if you moved it to 5 o'clock, well, she works till 6.
Okay.
Yep. And if you know, like, you obviously are not trying to just satisfy Jenny. You know, there's lots of other people like that. And if I flick it round to our other daughter, who's Lara, okay, and my word, she's politically engaged, but for her, she works double shifts. So you can shift it till the cows come home, and you're not going to you're not going to actually you're always going to be shutting people out. And it's people like me who have got the discretionary time. And my job, you know, like I would still turn up to community board meetings and so on when I was working full time, but I could juggle my timetable.
Yeah, there was a good cross section of people there, really, and for the community and those outside the community. But there are people obviously that have the ability to shift things around. So yeah, it's but yeah, certainly take that on board.
Yeah, I guess what you're saying, David, is essentially it's a problem. The problem is not so much getting the meeting time exactly right so that everyone can come along, because that's never going to happen. It's about thinking more creatively around those engagement processes. And yeah, do you think that if we had a process similar to the Brum Street overbridge process, that would have significantly improved this particular engagement from your point of view?
Yeah, I think it would. One of the things, like if you think of how that Brum Street process played out, firstly, it was very expensive time-wise for agencies, I am sure. But the community, so that it's two-way thing. So community in that particular case, they were engaged long before any of Waka Kotahi City Council, anything like that, were, you know, actually coming up with proposals. So they were all fired up. And so the school in that case was running community meetings to get ideas. So you sort of, it's a little bit different. But then when you look at what Waka Kotahi actually did, well, what this board did is that it went to the school. And that actually gave the opportunity. Then Waka Kotahi had multiple opportunities for people to come and engage. So they weren't a fixed sort of thing. So they were going away, collecting ideas from multiple sources, and then stitching up a proposal. Then and actually started today, bringing that proposal back to the community. And so there's this sort of iterative process. And I guess the question really has to be, you know, like in that sort of thing, you know, you can't go through that process if you're just changing where the no parking lines go on the street outside.
No,
it just isn't going to work. But there are, you know, and I think one of the things that runs through my mind is if you look at where the local government review has just been going, they've been talking about a more deliberative process and actually going out and engaging with people in a more proactive sort of way, rather than the sort of process that you've got at the moment, which is a more responding sort of way, you know, expecting people to come in and respond.
No, that makes total sense. Do you have a question, Keir? And then we might have to finish there.
One observation I always have is actually when I look around this board table, I do actually see a reasonably reflective group of people from the community. Not perfect, but I do see a range of ages and a range of different perspectives. So that's one thing I always try and balance is, you know, we bring perspectives to the decision making. Just looking at the Brum Street upgrade project as a total, that not just obviously the Addington Overbridge, but the total Brum Street upgrade State Highway 76 had a budget of I think 90 million. Obviously, many council projects have absolute they are right down to the bone in terms of being able to deliver something for the absolute. They really need to deliver on as little as possible to protect, to deliver value for money for the ratepayer, who we really, you know, have to think about quite carefully. How do you see that trade-off between where consultation processes start to either become so long in time that they start to soak up so much staff time, or even, obviously one of the big drivers of cost for an engineering project is engineering time. So when we start to consult on multiple options or start to consult on multiple debt for something like this, where we were, I think, looking at 500,000 budget, that does start to chew up quite a chunk of that. How do you see those trade-offs?
I think one of the things that ties up a lot of council time is consultations that actually don't need to happen. So for me, an example, like I understand that legally they may be required to happen, but in a practical world sense, they actually, so the changing where you have a no stopping line would be an example of that. Changing speed limits, to me, changing speed limits shouldn't be a democratic process, it's an engineering process built around safety. That might be contentious for some people. No. But you sort of, you spend your time, your consultation time on the things that actually matter. And the Brougham Street one would be a really good example of that. And arguably, so would the one, the Colombo Street Dyers Pass one. And yeah, so that actually comes back into the expectations from what I understand of Local Government Act. So the interpretation that I'm aware of is that things like, like as a residents association, we get asked for all manner of things like, extending the no stopping lines or whatever. And well, firstly, we're not qualified to have an opinion. And secondly, this is taking a heck of a lot of time. And why are we doing all this when actually what needs to happen is the no stopping lines need to move. So that to me is part of that. But another part of that, which is maybe a little bit more contentious, is that if you look at the demographic that votes, let's turn this around a bit. The proportion of people who turn out to vote in a local body election is, I think last time for Christchurch was about 43%. Okay, so who are the other 57%? And broadly speaking, is Jenny's generation are the ones that are away, and they are the people who are because they're not participating means that their values are not being represented, and so you end up with what would you say? Decisions that are skewed to a particular demographic. That would be my. So it's a problem that has no simple solution, but to me, one of the places that really has to start, which starts to resolve the question that you're talking about, is boosting that participation, both in terms of voting and as that goes along, building that participation in terms of engagement as well. So that's a rather long answer to your fairly short question.
Thanks so much, David. Yeah, really appreciate your time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cheers. Okay, so now we've got the PC14, PC13 briefing. Is it sorry, I've got Tom and Ike. Is it? Okay. Oh, I'm Glenda. Hi, Glenda. Yes, so there should be a button at the top. And when you speak with the microphone, just make sure it's pointed at your mouth and the light's turned on green. Which you should be able to do a button in front of you there. There's a
Great.
Oh, sweet, cool.
All right, thanks very much. Like I said earlier, my name is Ike Kleinboss. I am a principal advisor here in the City Planning team, and I'm joined by Glenda Dixon in our team and Brian Norton as well from our stormwater management team as well. So we've been asked to come today specifically to talk about qualifying matters that we have proposed as part of Plan Change 14 and also part of Plan Change 13 as well, and also to look at specifically likes of heritage controls and also stormwater management controls as well. And so we hope to provide a little bit of insight into that, answer any questions you have, and also talk about the next steps in the process as well. So in terms of what we have to give effect to, the legislation, in terms of government direction, principally we have two fundamental directions. The first is what's known as the medium density residential standards, otherwise known as MDRS, and this broadly sets the requirement of 3 stories and 3 units per site across all really urban residential sites. We also have the direction through what's known as the National Policy Statement for Urban Development, otherwise known as NPSUD, specifically Policy 3, and that directs a greater level of intensification within and around various commercial centres So not just the central city, but also suburban commercial centres as well. The only mechanism that we have to restrict any intensification that's otherwise directed through these two pieces of regulation is through a process of what's called qualifying matters, which is newly introduced to the Act and sets a prescriptive format for the criteria that needs to be met for any restrictions. Like I said just now, they are only in terms of restricting MDRS and policy 3 as part of what we have to do for our evaluation reporting for plan change 14 and 13. We have to assess the impact of development capacity. Both the MDRS and the policy 3 direction are very much towards enabling as much housing or commercial development as possible. And so there's very much a development capacity lens overall in terms of the costs of imposing those limits. We have to justify why the qualifying matter makes development inappropriate. So there's a very strong link between the nature of the qualifying matter that we're talking about and how we're seeking to nuance or reduce down any of the intensification that's otherwise directed. For some qualifying matters, it does require the additional step of site-specific analysis to evaluate on each site really the merits of further restrictions through qualifying matters as well. As part of any evaluation reporting for a planning process, a district plan, we need to evaluate the various options that are available. So there's quite a lot of work in terms of going through the various qualifying matters that we have. We have tens of qualifying matters introduced or proposed to be introduced as part of the process. And so reporting overall, I think there's about a 900-page evaluation report that council's drafted, and that includes 3,000 pages of appendices reports just for qualifying matters and additional other appendices for other parts of the proposals as well. So it is vast in terms of the evidential basis that's required in order to justify any restrictions on the intensification that's otherwise directed. So in terms of the prerequisites that are relevant to Christchurch, the first is what's called Section 6 matters under the Act, which are matters of national significance and other likes of coastal water environments, outstanding natural landscapes, significant mana whenua values, customary rights, historic heritage, and significant natural hazard risk areas as well. Also able to respond to any other national policy statement or New Zealand coastal policy statement direction as well. Safe and efficient operation of national significant infrastructure, the likes of the port, airport, state highway infrastructure, things like that as well. Open space for public use is protected from intensification, and also any designation or heritage order as well, the likes of protections for future infrastructure investment or otherwise. Any other matter that's necessary to implement to ensure consistency with iwi participation legislation, and also the sufficiency of what they call low density business land, which is otherwise known as industrial land, to ensure that there's sufficient capacity really for that. There is the ability, like I said earlier, to include any other matter, but it's only if those prerequisites of the Act are met. So character areas are an example of that, whereby a site-specific evaluation is required, and the evidential basis gets more onerous as a result. So what I'd just like to cover off is how it looks, I guess, from a spatial point of view for the proposal for the community board area. So I've got 2 slides here covering off the community board area. So I guess just to highlight some of the mapping that we have released. So you may have seen that we've provided interactive mapping as part of the Plan Change 14 and 13 proposal. What I'm showing on this is just the zoning. And so just to highlight that there are numerous layers that can sit on top of this. I just have zoning and the precincts that sit on top of that as well. Qualifying matters have just been taken off for that for now, just for clarity. But I guess just to highlight that what we have proposed within the area from a development perspective is very much to have a medium density response, giving effect to that 3 stories and 3 units per site. And so that that muted yellow colour, if you will, is all medium density through there as well. And anywhere where we have line work around a site, so we've got the blue area around Barrington there, and then some of the foothills there as well. Those are both precincts, and they manage the underlying zone in a different way relative to local kind of situation, I guess. So, for example, in the Port Hills area, we have a medium density area provided, and that's only within those areas that are highly accessible to high frequency public transport areas. What the precinct effectively does is ensures that the vacant allotment size retains the current approach of the Port Hills area at 650 square metres, and also ensures that the associated earthworks controls that we have that are more nuanced for the Port Hills are also carried over from the existing district plan as well. The other ones that we have, for example, around Barrington and also around the Sydenham area are really in terms of residential height control. So around Barrington, we're required to give effect to the NPSUD in terms of intensification within and around those commercial centres. And so within the blue area, there's an enabled height of 14 metres in that area. And then around the Sydenham area, there's a high density response giving effect to the different centre that's there. And so the precinct really sets a 6-storey direction for that area, or parts of that area as well. Further to the west, we also have the North Horswell Centre as well, which is also at 6 stories, highlighted there towards the arrow. Further to the east, again, those areas that are outside of highly accessible, frequent public transport areas, we have retained the operative zoning. So on the Port Hills area, it's retained as residential hills. And then also along the coastal environments, we've downzoned those areas responding to the additional coastal hazards we've identified as part of this process, most notably coastal inundation, also tsunami hazard risk as well. So in terms of an overview of the changes from a zoning perspective, like I said, we have a large amount of medium density in all those areas that are highly accessible. 20 metres or about 6 stories is around Sydenham, and also some of the mixed use areas and North Horswell as well. 14 metres around the Barrington area, and also 20 metres around North Horswell as well. For the qualifying matters, we have 2 heritage areas which are wholly newly introduced into the district plan, 5 character areas, 2 that have been added and 2 that have been removed as well. There's flood ponding management area as well, and so there's no medium density or high density that's permitted within those areas, and that's the same for the likes of the tsunami hazard area, coastal hazards, and also the waterway setbacks. We have various notable trees as well that we've identified or basically carried over from the existing district plan, and they set an exclusion area where houses can't exist within areas that would affect those notable trees. And lastly, we have slope hazard areas on the Port Hills, on those high risk natural hazard areas as well, as a qualifying matter. No, all right. Let's start. Okay. Great. And next I'll hand over to Glenda to cover off some of the heritage proposals.
Thanks, Ike. Before I talk to this slide, I just wanted to mention that other than residential heritage areas, which is what that abbreviation up there means, RHA, we have also proposed to add some additional scheduled items and settings into the district plan. In your wider area, I guess there's the Linwood and Sydenham cemeteries to be scheduled, a former Cashmere Sanatorium open air tuberculosis hut that you might be aware of, that's just off Major Aiken Drive. The Summerfield War Memorial Community Centre and Hall in Studham Street, and there's a modernist house, a Frankel architect modernist house in Ford Road. So those extra ones, there were of course other potential items, like there was a suggestion I think from members of the public about Princess Margaret Hospital, but in that case we didn't have owner support due to cost and structural factors. So anyhow, I'm going to talk about RHAs here. I mentioned that there's 2 within your area. There's 11 proposed in total. So one of them within your area is around Macmillan Ave. Might be hard to see, but it's that, I think it's basically red area that's centred on Macmillan Ave, and it extends from Dyers Pass Road across westwards, and there's a little bit of Wisby Street Avenue as well. It's smaller than the Cashmere character area, which is also shown on that aerial, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. So the houses in that area actually span quite a range of styles, and that's something that's caused some people to question whether or not this ought to be a heritage area. But the information I have from the heritage team is that the range of styles was generally favoured by well-to-do clients and their designers throughout the course of the 20th century. So there's arts and crafts, or English domestic revival, Georgian revival, and modernist styles. And that area was defined largely on the basis of a subdivision in 1908. Houses are set within well-established gardens and seek to capitalise upon views north over the city. And in many cases, they're large multi-storey homes on generous sections that provide a private retreat. So still on Macmillan here, in contrast to the greater emphasis on the flat, which is generally on the street and orientation to the street. So this was also an early Cashmere subdivision that was popular with academics and creative people. So there's a bit of history associated with it, as you would expect. The second one is Shelley Forbes residential heritage area. And this is kind of at the opposite extreme in some ways. That area exemplifies the working class history and identity of Sydenham of the later 19th and early 20th centuries. So the 2 subdivisions that area is based on were in 1877 and 1881. And the houses are in colonial cottage and villa styles. The subdivision was marketed to mechanics and artisans, and research indicates that those are the people who built and lived there. So that's sort of out to Colombo Street on the eastern extent and behind the Countdown site. So the next slide is a little bit more explanation about what residential heritage areas are. On the right-hand side, there's the criteria that we've used to identify them. So what's an RHA? It's a relatively intact area of the city with a distinct history of development. So collectively, the buildings and sites are areas of heritage significance to the city. Emphasis on collectively. So it's a group, as you can tell from those previous slides in the maps. So the majority of buildings within them are defined as being of defining or contributory value to the heritage values of the area. I don't know if you saw previously, but there were like 4 colours on those maps. There was blue, green, yellow, and a kind of a orangey colour. So basically we needed to have a reasonable degree of intactness and more than 50% of the buildings being of defining or contributory importance to the heritage value of the area. So on this slide, you can see the front page of an overall heritage area assessment report that's on the bottom left. And so we've got one of those for each area. And we also have just a little bit to its right, a record form example. So each property within the areas has had a site-by-site assessment, and it's been assessed in terms of those categories that I was talking about in terms of defining contributory. The other 2 are neutral and intrusive. And I can talk about those if you like. Basically, that's a framework for introducing a restricted discretionary activity assessment of new buildings and alterations to existing building exteriors in those areas. And the point of that is to seek to protect the collective heritage values by assessing the design of new proposals, including the scale, form and materials, so that new developments are better aligned with the heritage values of the area. This doesn't mean that you have to build something that's defining or contributory, just that you would hopefully build something that doesn't offend or is at least neutral in terms of the values of that area. So it's maintain and not degrade the heritage values, and hopefully enhance if that comes up as an opportunity, but basically maintain the authenticity of the area. And any assessment might be of a combination of factors which could achieve this. And it's similar to existing assessments of new developments on heritage scheduled sites. For example, it might be things like, oh, perhaps you could sort of change the picture of your roof, or sort of sometimes it's, details. It's just a sort of a broad contextual kind of reference. It doesn't mean that you have to build exactly the detail that they used to build in the past.
Sorry to interrupt, Glenda. Just because we are running a little bit behind time, and I do want to save time for questions. If there's any other key points you'd like to make before we wrap up, and then we'll move on to
yeah,
questions.
just about finished anyway. So I guess the difference between residential heritage areas and character areas that people have asked about is that the residential heritage areas have got a coherent history. And that's above and beyond what you might find in a character area where we're talking about a coherent character. So those are kind of really more based on the visual aspects of a coherent streetscape and buildings. But RHAs have got that extra layer of history.
Cool.
The last matter, the last matter I'd just like to cover off is stormwater management, which we're requested to cover off as well. So over to Brian about covering off what we can do.
So not much to say, really. We are not adding any significant rules to the plan change. We did talk quite a lot, not just stormwater, but three waters, about the ability of us to utilize qualifying matters as a way of managing effects on infrastructure. And where we got to effectively was that that would be extremely difficult to do and very time consuming and resource intensive and unlikely to succeed, given the way that the expectation was that the plan change was meant to be enacted. We have thought about this since the district plan review in 2016, and is at the same time we were given an opportunity to look at changes to district plan rules that could try to manage effects on infrastructure, and really declined to include anything at that time as well, mainly because we have other methods within the Building Act and the bylaw for three waters. There's two bylaws now, one for land drainage, one for water supply and wastewater. And effectively using our ability to control the discharges into the council's stormwater and three waters networks through other ways other than district plan. And so that's what we hope to continue to do. We all have concerns about the long-term effects of large uptake and medium density on the networks. We are transitioning from a sort of growth kind of decade or a little bit more into sort of an infill kind of situation, which is good for a lot of reasons. But what it does do is it puts a lot of stress on aging and undersized infrastructure in the city. And so I believe the council will need to start looking to redirect money that it has spent in the past on growth and putting it toward improving levels of service in existing infrastructure.
Great, thanks very much.
Great. And just to quickly wrap up in terms of the process, submissions on the plan changes close on Wednesday next week. In about July, we'll open for summary of submissions and also further submissions. So people who made a submission or affected by a submission can make another submission. Then basically from October, we'll getting into the independent hearings panel hearing process. And it's anticipated at this stage that in February they will deliver their recommendations to council, and it's upon council to endorse effectively that recommendation. Any element that isn't accepted from the recommendations go to the minister for approval. And so there's quite a novel process compared to other plan changes because of that. The independent hearings panel is made up of the following people, which I'll provide some detail on if you wish as well. We also, throughout the process, have an independent person funded by MFE called Jane West, who's a friend of the submitter, who people can use to formulate their submission as well. And I'll leave it there. Happy to answer any questions.
Great, thanks very much. So we've got only a short time for questions, but Lee, yep.
Just very briefly, several months in terms of tricky situations, but I just want to, just in terms of a district plan cycle would be 4 or 5 years is typically, or?
The Act requires every 10 years for the whole district plan to be reviewed.
Yep.
So if this were to come about, then we'll be required to do that around 2026 to have something out.
So, but the qualifying matters, there's tools within Plan Change 14 to allow you, because obviously we've got an evolving situation with climate change, to be able to critique mapping as we get more data, as we get more information.
Absolutely. It's worthwhile saying that while the perception is that this is it really in terms of qualifying matters, we are not restricted next year or the year after, or where the case may be, to introduce new qualifying matters via a plan change.
Okay. And just one, the Hills precincts in Kashmir stand out a little bit, and I know I think you justified that with the frequency of bus, but I think only every 3rd or 4th bus goes up the hill. But looking at suburbs like Redcliffe and other kind of hill suburbs, why want we a little bit more proactive in those areas where we know there's going to be some managed retreat, to allow density where we're going to need it, and fundamentally some suburbs are going to change. So why is that in isolation probably only the one or a couple of the only hill suburbs where there's probably a lot of potential close to high frequency bus routes?
Yeah,
it stands out a little bit in terms of the mapping.
Yeah, I guess firstly, the level of assessment hasn't been as granular as that in terms of response to natural hazard risk. But I'd say broadly, the answer would be that there is an awful lot of development capacity that is brought online throughout this process, if it all goes to pass as we're notified. And so that means that there are various attractive options across the city whereby people could retreat to, that are highly accessible as well to where people work or connect to work through public transport means as well.
Cool, thanks so much. Let's leave it there. Appreciate your time. Sorry, Lee. Cool. Okay, so next up we've got Hunter Terrace Pump Track, but actually we've got to, yeah, true. So we've reached the end of the public part of the meeting. Thanks for coming. Sorry to kick you out, Derek.